I spent about 40 years in radio as far as my career went, and it started pretty much here at KVMR. I had been, in 1967 and 68, I had been trained in the National Guard in DC to be a radio equipment repairman, and had never really done much with it, but it was part of the whole Vietnam War thing and so on. And then I moved to California in 1971 to Sacramento. And then while I was there, I ended up getting involved in music. So I was playing music in Sacramento in Northern California and came to Grass Valley with the band I was in, and we went to the Holiday Lodge, it was called at the time. It's a Holiday up on Grass Valley Highway or whatever that's called. And we played for 3 different weekends and stayed with Paul Emery, who's a renowned person in the music scene here. I'd met him in Sacramento in the music there, and we stayed at a house he had on Bennett Street and would play at night and went to the river and did all that, and just decided that this would be a great place to live at one point. Later that fall, I met Andrea, who's now my wife, and she was thinking about moving up to Grass Valley, and she was living in Auburn at the time. So we decided to move in together and moved up here. And one day in the summer, I guess it was, there was the newspaper, the weekly newspaper here was called the Mountain Messenger at the time. And we saw a little article, just this big, that said that this radio station was starting. And so I called up, and it turned out it was the very first day that KVMR was on the air, and I trekked up to the top of Banner Mountain, and that was the beginning of my career there. So that's actually the lead-in into, that part about me. And I just was volunteering to do something that'd be fun. I like to play records. I never thought it would be a 40-year career, which went to a lot of places, actually, from here. I'm a singer more than anything else. I can play rhythm guitar adequately. But yeah, I spent about 6 years in Sacramento doing music after I left graduate school. And actually I didn't leave grad school, I kind of left it. And then at the end, right around before I came here, decided, I had 7 years to get my master's degree. So I decided to finish it off, and when we moved up here I was going back and forth to Sacramento to finish. But for the 6 years there, played in various bands, solo and different kinds of bands, playing music acoustic, and then some lounge bands all in Northern California and so on. And just when the band was getting popular and we had 12 weeks booked on the road in Oregon and Washington, New York, the bass player decided he didn't like the drummer, and the keyboard player's wife didn't want him to travel. And so the night before we were leaving on this tour, it all fell apart. So I started making sandwiches instead. Actually, I started as a dishwasher, typical musician story, and then ended up the manager of this sandwich shop, and then managed the first bagel place in Sacramento, actually. I went up there, it was the first day they were on the air, and they were only on the air for 2-3 hours. It was evening. Went up there in the middle of nowhere, and they were doing radio. It got dark and the crickets came on. They were louder than you could talk. That was the ambience of the radio station. But it was a fantastic place. I don't think the station was up there that long. The transmitter's been there. So the transmitter was in the corner, and you had a mixing board, which I knew from being a musician. I knew how to use all that stuff and the electronics, and a microphone and 2 turntables. I think that was all there was. Maybe there was a cassette player, I don't remember. The best story was not the sound, but we were up there in a thunderstorm. Andrea and I used to do a show together, and I went to take the record and put it on the shelf behind me, and lightning struck, and a lightning bolt shot out of the microphone. So, you're looking, I just happened to not be right there, but it shot this far out of the microphone at you because it hit the antenna and went down and shot out. And so we did play a lot of music and not try to talk on the microphone that night. In the very early days, we would there was only a few people on the air. As a matter of fact, I went up and said, I'm interested in this. The first question was, you want to sell underwriting, which is, raise money for the station. I said, well, I learned that I'm not a salesman, so that's not what I'm interested in doing, but all the other I could do. He said, okay, come back tomorrow. You got a 3-hour shift. I said, well, what do you want me to do? He says, well, you play an hour of jazz, an hour of classical, and an hour of whatever you want. So that was really pretty much the way it went. I didn't know anything much about jazz or classical, but I knew enough to hear it and play it, so I did it and then went on from there. Well, I mean, to me, that's, there's two sides of it. There's the part that is about entertaining the audience, which of course is the primary thing that radio is about. It's a relationship with an audience. And that's the part that I always tried to teach people is, and the great thing about radio is that it's a medium that has no object. So it's totally a subjective medium. There's nothing physically that you are relating to. Yeah, there are speakers, but you're not even aware of the speakers. You're in your car, it's just sound in your head. So it's sort of a voice in your head. And try to get that sense of the intimacy that you can make in radio and teach people, that you got to get yourself out of the way almost, because essentially you are that close to someone. You're part of their subconscious. So I love that about radio, and it can happen like this, and it's cheap. And you can do, these days, especially with an iPhone or something, you can create the audio in a minute and put it back on the air. It's really wonderful. The idea of getting as many perspectives as possible. One of the hardest things for my time at KVMR was bringing in conservative voices and conservative radio. Now, people would argue, oh, there's plenty of that on the radio. But again, even there's not the sense of the guy down the street who's living on that ranch over there that you don't know and would never talk to. So to me, I think the concept of the ability to get to all the voices that are out there and be conscious of not only limiting yourself to the people you're most comfortable with or the people who espouse your own point of view is really where you're going to get richness. Because once you get those stories of people that are not like you, that's when you start realizing everybody is a lot more alike than different. So, and that needs to be shown, whether it's visually or written word or in radio. That's really what we need to see. That's where our, if our problems are ever going to get solved, it's based on our commonalities. So that would be, a little highfalutin, but I think that's really a big part of what, the community can be when you really get into people. So look for, again, to KVMR, make sure you try to be as broad as you possibly can. Watch out about getting caught too much in doctrine. And with all radio, any institution as it gets older, watch out for letting the money and the financial needs run everything else. It's a subtle process that happens. But KVMR has done a great job.